In Hebrews chapter 11, okay, what I call the Faith Hall of Fame, by faith they did this, by faith they did that. Rahab the prostitute is put into the Faith Hall of Fame. If you know anything about the story of Rahab, when the spies came into town to scout things out for Joshua and the army, Rahab hid them up on the roof. And when the city officials heard that these spies were there and were up to no good, they went looking for them. They made their way to Rahab, and Rahab lied and said, no, I think they already left, and they went the other way. And so the government officials take off, the soldiers take off, and then she gets these spies out from under this pile of hay and sends them off and says, when you come back, please spare me. Right? When the army comes through, please spare me and my family. She ends up in the Faith Hall of Fame. How do we justify that? Yes?
I think you're talking about good versus evil.
Okay.
Satan's, if you're a Christian, going back to the Nazi thing, we're called to do what God would do in that situation and Rahab would do. And you're not dealing with apples and apples, you're dealing with apples and sweet potatoes. That's evil at work.
Okay, so if, using Rahab's scenario, if by lying and hiding these spies I do a greater good, it prevents more evil, then that's morally justified. Is that what you're saying? Because there's evil and good, evil is so bad. Okay. All right, let's keep talking about this for a second, then I want to pose a question. We'll go to Denny and then over here.
Okay. See, to me that's dangerous because I'm going to know where you draw the line. If you're going to lie for good things, what is good? And who decides what is good? And if you have non-Christians that think different things are good than what you think, they think that because you're telling them it's okay to lie for good things, they're going to be lying about things that you wouldn't lie about.
Okay, all right. So you're posing a question, which is it's good to lie, or it's good to uphold the good and resist the evil, but it begs the question, what is good? What is good? How do we determine what good is? Okay?
Denny said at the beginning, God knows our hearts. I think he said that. And I was thinking the same thing in the case of poor Timothy. God knew her heart. That wasn't self-serving. That lie was not self-serving her. That was protecting others.
Okay.
And I think in Rahab's case as well, that lie wasn't necessarily self-serving. It was protecting others.
Okay. So in that situation, would it be fair for me to summarize that you would say morally permissible lies are morally permissible if it means saving lives? Slippery slope. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Whoa! Okay, let me touch on a couple things and we need to keep moving on. I want to go back to the Rahab thing. What is the emphasis of chapter 11? Faith. It's not the Truth Hall of Fame. It's the Faith Hall of Fame. Okay? The irony is, back to Denny's point, she had faith that God was going to save her when the army came. She didn't have faith that God would work out the situation to hide the spies, right? Okay? So yes, she is absolutely kind of put on a pedestal in chapter 11. But I would argue she's not put on a pedestal for truth-telling. She's put on a pedestal for believing that the God of the Jews, of which she was not a Jew, she was an alien and a foreigner, was the one true God. That's the significant piece, okay? Now, the Nazis. Here's my question. If the SS came to your door, what would Jesus do if he answered that door? Would Jesus say, I need to lie here because I know I have 30-some people down in the basement, and saving a life is morally superior to maintaining truth and integrity? Right? What would Jesus do if he was in that situation? John?
Well, I don't know what Jesus would do. And second, I think it is a slippery slope argument that when you decide when it is morally permissible to lie. However, in thinking of this question during the week, and I just pose this as a question, In Matthew 12, Jesus is confronted by the sick Pharisees because his disciples are going through the grain fields on the Sabbath and picking the heads of grain. And they say he's breaking the Sabbath. And Jesus never says he's not breaking the Sabbath. Nor does he say his disciples are not breaking the Sabbath. He says there's a greater law here. And he uses an example of David breaking the law. And so in that case, Jesus is saying there's a greater law here. And then he goes on in there to say, you know, if you have a sheep and it falls into a pit, who wouldn't pull it out? But yet you're not allowed to work on the Sabbath. So he is creating some conditional responses to a commandment just as strong as you shall not bear false witness, as you shall not break the Sabbath.
Okay.
Same list of commandments.
Yeah, the Sabbath is in the top 10, right? The 10 Commandments. So, and that's a whole other conversation about why we prioritize certain commandments over others, okay? But it's in that. The key distinction, what was Jesus talking about when he's kind of going after the Pharisees who are giving his disciples a hard time for breaking the Sabbath? That is, in some respects, that they had so many add-ons to the principle of the Sabbath that it had become oppressive, to where you couldn't, you know, help somebody on the Sabbath, heal, or you couldn't grab a few things of grain because all of a sudden technically you're working. Well, who decided what work looks like, right? God operates on the idea of principles. Now, he gave certain specifics in the Old Testament because this was the first time that the God of the universe had interacted in a moral sense with any group of people. He chose the Jews, said, I will be your God, you will be my people. And the Jews represent kind of this model, this case study example of what it looks like to have a personal relationship with the God of the universe. Well, that means then that they need to understand certain laws. They need to understand God's way of doing things, and that's why God gives all these principles and these ways of living together in a society. The idea that Jesus never said he wasn't breaking the Sabbath begs the question in my mind, would Jesus break the Sabbath in a truly immoral way, you know, the way we might violate the Sabbath and the Ten Commandments? Would Jesus ever violate the Ten Commandments? I don't think he could because he's God. He might nuance them. He might help us have a broader understanding of the principle, but by definition of being God, he cannot sin. And if breaking the Sabbath is a sin, according to God's definition, then that goes against God's character. John?
And that's what I'm saying about truth. Could the same thing not be said about bearing false witness against your neighbor?
Okay. All right.
So I'm posing the question, but there are times when Jesus appears to set aside that principle. I understand the Pharisaical law as well, but
Yeah.
again, it's an interesting.
It's very interesting, especially when there isn't a specific declaration.
And people talked about faith, though. Did the apostles not have faith that Jesus could provide the grain outside of them picking it?
Right.
Did David not have faith that they could have gotten food without eating the consecrated bread?
Right. Yeah, that's why this isn't easy. And that's the point. That's why I'm wanting to have this discussion. Okay? Eric, did you have something?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I would say I think to poke kind of a hole in your question, the examples Guinness gives and you're giving are these ones that are so far-fetched. I mean, Nazi Germany. I mean, not to say that couldn't happen in the United States right now, but the likelihood of something like that, at least in the near future, is quite distant. Or Pharaoh's, the midwives, which if you read where it talks about that, it doesn't have the midwife's line, it has Pharaoh's mother, Moses' mother hiding. But I think the problem is we have to have things that are, so what about this issue that you can truly go through right now and say that, is that allowed?
Okay, that's where we're going. That's where we're going. Okay? And part of the reason why we use extreme examples is to get at the heart of really what we're talking about. Okay? Scott here, and then I'm going to keep rolling. Okay? Yeah, when Abraham lied about Sarah being his wife when they were going through Egypt, okay, is that morally permissible or not? Right. Right, exactly. He wasn't privy to what the reality was in the situation, and he actually got punished for it.
We got into this conversation last night to kind of tie into your point, to bring it back, because we had to do the same thing, bring it back to something that would be, as of today, I brought up the domestic violence issue. What if you had a daughter, which we don't, but you knew she was being abused, and you were hiding that daughter from an abusive husband? Would you lie to protect that daughter? I think most people would.
Okay, now we need to make the distinction between what would I do and what should be done, right? That's kind of, I was part of this discussion on this book. I was the one reading the book, and I'm the one that prompted this, like, hey, let's talk about this. And it got really passionate, okay, as we were talking. And some of the folks, and it was all solid Christian people from all over the United States and the world, we were having this discussion. It got down to the point for some people where it was, I don't think God would want me to do that, but I'd still do it anyway and pray for forgiveness. Okay? All right, that's fair enough. Here's my question. Back to this idea of what would Jesus do? Would Jesus lie for a greater good? Ever. He can't. He can't. Okay, now we tend to kind of, the cynics just, well, it's Jesus. He knows exactly how to navigate the situation. Yes, that's all true. But just on basic principles, Jesus, by definition, is the way, the truth, and the life. There can be no lie in God's character, otherwise he ceases to be God. Because here's what happens. What happens if God lies even once about anything, big or small? Okay, he's not God, but what?
Credibility.
Credibility. Credibility. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you lie about that, he'll lie. You know, it's kind of what we've all said. If you lie about one thing, where do you draw the line? Where do you, it's your credibility.
Right. Right. How many of us, and don't raise your hands, how many of us have ever lied? How many of us have ever had somebody lie to us? Okay? If we lie, we lose credibility. If they lie, they lose credibility. It creates lack of trust. That's why in our house, I talk to our kids all the time. Okay? And I've said this. In our house, lying is an automatically spankable offense. If you get caught in a lie, it's done. You cannot plead your case. Your case has already been pled, You're guilty. Why? Because truth and trust are so important. And what now is kind of an old idea, your word is your bond, a handshake. We can make a multi-million-dollar deal over a handshake. You can't do that today. I wish we could go back to where you could, because we understood trust and all of that, right? So lying and truth are absolutely essential. And if that credibility drops, it's tough to get it back. Now, if on the highest level, the person who establishes the standard lies just once, then all of a sudden it does cause us to question all kinds of other things, about not just morals and ethics, but salvation. How do I know for sure that accepting Christ as my Savior and Lord is going to get me to heaven? Well, I don't, because God lied about whatever, right? John, and then, here.
Lila Rose is an example today of someone who goes to abortion clinics under false pretenses, claiming to be a pregnant 15-year-old, to expose the truth about Planned Parenthood and others. But yet, and James O'Keefe has done the same thing with a video camera, going into corrupt organizations and evil organizations to expose the truth so that the light will be shown, so society will correct those wrongs or come against those wrongs. And yet Lila is raised up in Christian circles as a heroine to save the lives of those babies. But she goes in deception, lying about her state to expose the lies of Planned Parenthood and
you've probably seen these. You've probably seen these videos. That they're kind of these exposure videos. And let me just say,